Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're about to completely shatter one of the most vivid images from your childhood. We all grew up with them, right? We played with the action figures, we watched the huge blockbuster movies, we stared at the illustrations in our textbooks. We thought we knew exactly what the rulers of the prehistoric world looked like. But what if the foundation of all those epic, terrifying monsters was actually based on a massive, fundamental misunderstanding? Today, we are going beyond the bone to reimagine the dinosaur form. We're going to dive into how early science got it so incredibly wrong and how one simple, mind-blowing thought experiment flipped our entire understanding of ancient life completely upside down.
So, let's kick things off with Section 1, the dinosaur myth, and rethinking our prehistoric assumptions.
Okay, everything you know about what dinosaurs looked like is a lie. It's a pretty bold statement, isn't it? But honestly, it absolutely hits the nail on the head. It's fascinating how a single scientific assumption could just snowball into this global, multi-generational visual truth. For decades, whenever we thought of paleontology, our brains immediately went to these monstrous, skeletal beasts covered in really tight, scaly armor. But researchers eventually realized that those early visual reconstructions, they were completely off base. The terrifying, gaunt creatures of our imaginations were actually the result of a very specific and highly flawed method of interpretation.
Which brings us to Section 2, the shrink-wrapping method, and the flawed logic of early paleontology.
To really understand this myth, we have to look at the method early archaeologists were actually using because, think about it, when they first dug up these massive, incredible dinosaur bones, they were basically staring at a giant puzzle. They had the framework, the skeleton itself, but they had absolutely no idea what these creatures looked like when they were, alive and breathing. They had to make a best guess, but unfortunately, the logic they used to reconstruct the animal from the inside out was fundamentally broken. And that brings us to shrink wrapping. Shrink wrapping is this outdated method of just taking scaly skin and virtually wrapping it directly around the skeletal remains. By doing this, early scientists completely ignored all the essential biological features. They ignored the fat, they ignored the muscle, and they ignored the connective tissue that gives literally any living creature its actual shape. The result? Well, it's those famous, gaunt, bony appearances that have dominated pop culture for over a century.
It honestly boils down to a historical process that is both simple and highly flawed. Step 1, you discover the dinosaur bones. Step 2, you wrap them tightly with scaly skin. Step 3, call it a day. It kind of sounds comical when we break it down into 3 little steps, doesn't it? But this was genuinely the foundational approach for those early visual reconstructions. It was literally a skin-to-bone translation, just completely skipping over the complex, bulky layers of anatomy that actually define a living animal silhouette.
Let's move right into Section 3, the modern animal test, exposing the absurdity. Now here is where things get really fun and honestly a little bit terrifying. The crucial point is figuring out what happens when we apply this exact same flawed logic to the wildlife we know today. I want you to pause for a second and just run this thought experiment in your head. What if we use this shrink-wrapping logic on modern animals? If we dug up the bones of animals living right now and handed those bones to an early paleontologist who used that exact same skin-tight method, ignoring all the fat and muscle, what on earth would those animals look like? Well, let's take a look at the bizarre reality of a world without natural mass. Imagine subjecting these modern animals to the shrink-wrap test. The zebra, the elephant, the rhino, the hippo, and the swan. Now we all know exactly what these animals look like, right? We know the thick, majestic bulk of an elephant. We know the powerful, rounded mass of a rhino. But under the shrink-wrap method, every single one of these animals becomes completely and utterly unrecognizable. The method just universally fails across all these different species.
Take the hippo, for example. You'd look at this reconstruction and reasonably ask, that's supposed to be a hippo? If you have ever seen a hippo skull, it is massive, it's jagged, and honestly, it looks like the jaw of a ferocious alien predator. If you shrink-wrap scaly skin directly over a hippo skull, ignoring its incredibly thick layer of fat and its massive cheek muscles, you do not get the heavy, rounded, river-dwelling animal we all know. You get a terrifying, skeletal, alien monster. It looks absolutely absurd.
And then we look at the bird kingdom. And oh my God, what even is that swan? Just let that sink in for a moment. Think about a swan. It's elegant, it's smooth, it's beautifully rounded by layers of pristine white feathers and muscle. Now imagine taking away every single feather, every ounce of fat, and shrink-wrapping skin tightly around its delicate, bizarre little skeletal frame. It would literally look like a horror movie prop. The punchy realization here is that the shrink-wrap method turns our most graceful modern animals into straight-up nightmare fuel. So what's the big takeaway from all this? It's the missing elements.
It's the fat, the muscles, and the feathers that make animals look like they actually do in real life. Without these critical biological layers, an animal's skeleton tells us almost nothing about its true outward appearance. When scientists looked at that shrink-wrapped hippo and the featherless alien swan, it prompted this massive moment of clarity. They realized, yeah, maybe dinosaurs didn't actually look like that either.
And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, Section 4, the real dinosaurs and the modern scientific consensus. Once the scientific community recognized just how absurd the shrink-wrap test was, they had to go all the way back to the drawing board. They had to stop looking at dinosaurs as just walking skeletons and start treating them as fully fleshed out, living, breathing animals. We can really clearly see that paradigm shift now. We have the old view, those gaunt, scaly, shrink-wrapped bones completely lacking in fat and natural mass, exactly like the textbook visual we all grew up with. But then compare that to the new view, which represents the modern scientific consensus. We're talking about animals possessing soft tissue, hanging flesh, lips, and feathers. It is such a striking contrast between a bony movie monster and a nuanced, fleshy reality. Let's really hammer home these contemporary findings, because this is the modern dinosaur reality. Soft tissue, hanging flesh, lips actually covering their teeth, and, incredibly, feathers. Understanding that these creatures had complex layers of soft tissue has completely revolutionized our perception of ancient life. The majestic rulers of the prehistoric world weren't the bony, scaly dragons of vintage movies. They were thick, vibrant, and incredibly diverse animals, much like the wildlife we see roaming the earth today.
And honestly, this leaves us with a truly fascinating question to ponder. If our terrifying cinematic monsters were actually feathered and fleshy, what else have we gotten completely wrong about ancient Earth? Think about the ripple effect of this one realization. If a simple shift in understanding soft tissue completely rewrites the visual history of the dinosaurs, what other mysteries are just hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to look at them through a different lens? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. And hey, I hope you never look at a textbook illustration or a hippo the same way again.